Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is third week, so we convene again to discuss the rest of civil law traditions. We in this class was a commercial law issues concerning the civil law tradition, and also reception of Roman law will be briefly visited. And section 8 pertains to national states and national law, which will be discussed briefly also. And finally, we'll review the German legal science, which is foundational about the current form of a legal culture across global states. And for the last part of this class, we'll deliberate on a distribution of civil law, how the civil law traditions diffuse across the global states. The influence will even reach the Latin American states, including Brasilia, for the way of operation of a Western imperialism. And in the second class, we'll advance to investigate the legal structures of civil traditions. So the topic would encompass the parliamentary system of government, and our concerns will be made on the Constitution, and particularly judicial review of a civil law country. As you know, the United States is an original state which established a judicial review system by way of case laws. The famous case is what I call a Marbury Madison that tradition, and that system was first incorporated into the Constitution Code of Austria and Czechoslovakia. So the problem was discussed, how the judicial review functions to ensure the democratic regime of each state and a safeguard of a basic rights of citizens. So we now start at the point where we stopped last Friday. As you know, we regularly meet in person in the education building, a Friday morning class. So I encourage you to participate in both classes more actively. The nature of this class will be brief, in principle, or some basic description of a civil law tradition. So I now intend to supplement the classes with other pertinent cases or excerpts of articles. The delivery will be made in printouts and in-person class on Friday. So it is required to participate. Okay, let's begin section 6, titled Commercial Law. As I've said, the Lex Mercatory flourished across the Mediterranean areas. The principal reason for that prosperity will come from the common basis of a merchant society, and kind of a customer laws were easily forced to be made into a law, and some initiative was also made to codify the lex marquetoria into a national statute, which was seen in 13 British jurisdictions. In addition to Roman civil law and canon law, commercial law furnished another universalizing tenet as Europe emerged from the relative economic stagnation of the Middle Ages, with the rise of towns, the birth of markets, fairs and banks, the rapid expansion of maritime and overland trade, and the eventual development of large, flourishing commercial centers, there appeared the need for a body of law to govern business transactions. Since several features of Roman law proved unsuitable for this purpose, guilds and merchants associations established their own rules and their own tribunals. The merchants' courts worked out informal rules and expeditious procedures that were practical, fair, grounded in the uses of businessmen. These rules in time came to be recognized and applied as customary law by secular and ecclesiastical authorities. So I prepared some visual aids to facilitate your imagination. So you can see the features of medieval merchants who traded the items in the ancient forms of markets. So you can see a Westerners engaged in a transaction. Eventually, the law merchant became international, a body of generally accepted commercial rules that transcend political boundaries. It also proved stronger than legal traditions, spreading even into England, where the Roman law brought back from Italy had met with a resistance outside the walls of the universities. So the form of law is a little naive and primitive, and the ambiguities or some lack of legal technicalities could be despised by some more enhanced level of legal jurists. The kind of context would expose us to be more aware of the dynamics in the European country. The Middle Ages were an era of numerous overlapping and a competing jurisdiction and sources of law. In the absence of strong central states, the notion of law as command of the sovereign had no meaning. Ecclesiastical courts were apt to apply a canon law. The courts of guild would apply the law merchants, while other judges in cities and towns would tend to search for an appropriate law, first in local custom or statute, then with the help of university scholars filling the gaps with just commune. Aided by the expansion of economic activity, the enthusiasm of legal scholars, and by the idea of the continued Holy Roman Empire, the jus commune became the basic law of a great part of continental Europe. It proved capable of dealing with many of the new problems posed by a more complex economy, yet as part of a not entirely forgotten past, it had a certain familiarity. Through the process, the civil law lawyers called reception. The revived Roman private law moved from the universities into courts. It should be noted, however, that the Roman public law itself, relatively underdeveloped, was not similarly received. There was no place for public law so long as no strong central governments existed. The formality and the extent of reception in a given country and the type of interactions that occurred between the jus commune and the medieval Romano-Germanic base varied considerably. In certain parts of Italy, the influence of Roman law has remained so strong that it is perhaps not quite accurate to speak of a reception there. In Spain, however, the Jewish commune was always in tension with various vigorous local customary traditions. In the regions of France, south of Loire, where Roman law influence had been strong, the local customary law was already heavily Romanized. Thus, there was a more extensive reception there than in northern regions of France, where the various local customs had always been of great importance than Roman law. The Jewish commune infiltrated the law of the various regions of the Holy Roman Empire of the Germanic nation to the point where it came to be regarded as common law of the empire. In 1495, when a central imperial court was established, the judges were obliged to decide cases according to this common law, unless a conflicting local custom or statute could be proved. The difficulty of proving a controlling German law meant, in practice, that the received Roman law became the basic law of all the regions of Germany. The reception of a Roman law on such a large scale in Germany is usually explained by a combination of factors. Roman law meant no resistance from a strong national legal profession, court system, or from the existence of common body of German law. Both the weakness of the imperial power and its claim to being the success of the Roman Empire facilitated the reception. Finally, and probably most importantly, Roman law met the increasingly urgent need to deal with the inconvenience that the variety of local customs posed for intercourse among the many small independent territories that formed the German Confederation. The wide-scale Roman law reception in Germany was a crucial event for the later development of German legal science, producing a much more extensive systematization of law than occurred elsewhere. From the beginning, judges relied heavily on legal scholars for information and guidance concerning the local law as well as the received Roman law. Indeed, by 1600, it was a common practice for judges to send out the record of difficult cases to university law faculty and to adopt the faculty's collective opinion on questions of law. So, as I introduced, the authority of a university scholar is superior in practice to the scope of legal practitioners, including judges. This tradition remains strongly, but in reform, in modest form, but on equal steps of a interintelligence in this contemporary time. This practice of Aktenversundung, which continued until the 19th century, resulted in the accumulation of an extensive body of common doctrine that transcended the borders of the various German political entities. Systematized in reports and essays, distillations from scholarly opinions rendered in actual controversies became, as Dawson has said, a kind of case law secreted in the interstices of a learned writings. So I also like to remind that the principled way could be based on a civil approach of civil law system. For example, the political unification may be instantly followed by codification effort. But in progress, there is an urgent need of a case laws which can be detailed and provides a kind of breeding rules to be actually applied in practice over many cases. So, and the process could be enriched of a progress of practices to have a kind of legal system based on a case rules. So it is interactive, as I often mention, to see the nature of a legal culture. In Europe, generally, the Jewish commune, like the Latin language and the universal church, was an aspect of the unity of the West at a time when there were no strong centralized political administrations and no unified legal systems, but rather a continuous struggle among the competing and overlapping jurisdictions of local, manorial, ecclesiastical, mercantile, and loyal authorities. From the 15th century on, however, the relationship between the received Jewish commune and the diverse local and regional customer laws began to be affected in varying degree by the rise of nationalism and the increasing consolidation of royal power. So the picture on the screen suggests the moral transformation of Jewish commune. So it was wrote by Westcott and dealt with the issue of a theology and contract law. So actually, these times we can see a highly, by way of a Jewish commune, to a common concept or a understanding of a laws in nature and in substantiation, and also in practice. Gradual political unification in Europe did not immediately bring about national legal unification, but it did arouse interest in customer laws as a national law. So the rise of nation states and national law, which is generally considered to be created in the peace regime of a Westphalia at the end of a religious war, which brought an intense sacrifice of religious people, now redirected the European politics into kind of a different methodology. So the nation states was marshaled due to the result of a series of intense wars. And of course, the rise of nation states also offers the basis for the contemporary forms of international law. Sovereign states could only be an entity to enter into a treaty relations. Without this logic or a discourse of a legal virtue or rules, then we have no contemporary forms of treaty or international laws. Since the kings or dukes in medieval times are theoretically and spiritually subject to the authority of Pope. We have recently received a new Pope, whose name is a Francisco. In English, it means a Frenchman. So the Franks is very important when we understand the politics or laws and religion of the old continent. So basically, it is a significant event that we see the rise of a nation state. And the kind of logic would be applied in theory by way of a God's representative. The land representative of God's command may be transposed into a authority of a secular governor. The names would differ in each area of governance, for example, dukes, prince, or a kings in some cases. But also we can see development of laws in terms of international context. The significance will be drawn from a Grotius, who is founding scholar, to base the fundamental principles of international law now prevailing over, but with some progress of a modification. Kind of concept could switch in some cases or in some situation to adapt the series of laws and rules. For example, the majority rule has been gradually a focus as a new way of a consensus in international organization for our instant illustration. A gradual political unification, however, did not necessarily bring the initiative of a codification, which would be more flourished in later times, as I've introduced. The way for this development had been prepared, in a sense, by the 14th century commentators, with scholarly attention from textual exegesis of digest to consideration of the adaptability of Roman legal rules to a contemporary conditions. In the 16th, 17th centuries, as the center of legal scholarship shifted to France and Holland, the methods of the Bologna's commentators were replaced by those of French legal humanists and the Dutch natural law school. The humanists used techniques of history and philosophy to study a Roman law. The view of Roman law as a historical phenomenon and the corpus jus civilis as merely an ancient text rather than as living law or written reason marked a step to the eventual displacement of jus commune. So the rise of nation state needs to be put to contrast with a jus commune in your understanding of a comparative development. So this recent challenge to the authority of Roman law was continued by the 7th century Dutch natural law school, whose members developed a systematic theory of law grounded in what they conceived to be the universal law of nature. So as I introduced, Grotius also falls within this nature of school, a Dutch natural. He is Dutch he is of Dutch origin and kind of Europeans who share the rising principles, benefited from the prosperity of legal studies at this time. The comprehensive legal system building of these Dutch jurists was the prelude to modern codification. The awakening of interest in national law was only one of several parallel developments that marked the end of the unity of the West and the rise of modern nation states. National literatures began to appear. The vernacular languages began to be used in universities. The differences widened between national churches and Rome. In the legal area, as long as the state had been non-existent or minimal, there was no public, administrative, or constitutional law in the modern sense. However, as political power became sufficiently centralized at different times in different parts of Europe, both public law and national law developed rapidly. So in the picture on the page of the screen, you will see a Code civil de Francais. The codification effort will follow. In many parts of Europe, legal nationalism early took the form of codification. The first of these national codes appeared in Scandinavian countries in the 17th and 18th centuries. Then a second generation of codes not only aspired to bring about legal unity within one kingdom, but also attempt to a synthesis of the political and philosophical soul of the 18th century. These codes were the product of enlightened monarchs like Voltaire's friend Frederick II of Prussia and Joseph II of Austria, and the bureaucratic administrators. They were founded on the creed of enlightenment. The rational, clear, and comprehensive legal system could be devised by intelligent human beings. It was taken for granted that such a system would be an improvement on traditional law. An inevitable consequence of the unification of national law in these early codes was that the jus commune was displaced as the basic source of law. To be sure, the draftsmen of national codes drew heavily upon the jus commune as well as on national law, but the authority of the law from then on was derived from the state, not from any idea of the inherent reasonableness or a suitability of the legal norms themselves. The Prussian general territorial law of 1794 is chiefly remembered today as a monument of legal hubris. In its ambition to foresee all possible contingencies and to regulate the range of human conduct down to the most intimate details of family life, it was hampered in operation both by its excessive detail and its failure to acknowledge the limits of law. So you can see some monumental example which the codification may bring legal lives. It is better to contain a principal provisions. It will make a fault line of fault lines if it unfortunately detailed in extensive form, as like in General Territorial Law of 1794. So one of reminder in the civil law traditions and juries kept on this context of lessons. So the law is essentially a living creature to be adapted to actual practices. In this aspect, the common law was better in many senses. The national codes, however, have had such widespread and lasting influence that they and the accompanying ideologies can be said to become part of the contemporary civil law tradition. The French Civil Code of 1804 and the German Civil Code of 1896 have served as models for most of the modern civil codes. So different from each other, yet sharing a common tradition, they both decisively affected the shape of civil law systems of today. French revolutionary ideas and the German legal science not only gave a special stamp and a flavor to their respective national codes, but affected legal thought throughout and beyond the civil law world. The consolidation of French royal power from the end of the 15th century to the revolution of 1789 made France the first modern nation, a politically unified society under strong central rule. The ancient regime was not able, however, to achieve legal unification. So it is interesting, as you see in later of this class. So the centralization trend is very strong in a French context, so, and the load of juries is also enormous, but may face a kind of a great predicament. So the context would affect the sentiment of a French citizens who sharply disfavor judiciary over a long period of time, and also they later even divested in a modified form the authority of legislature in many contexts. So now we generally consider the French Republic as kind of a absolute precedence in a contemporary times. And actually they saw a kind of circular framework of, between the monarchy and a modern type of precedence of the series of revolution, as you are aware. A traveler in France changed laws. A Voltaire once said, as often as he changes horses, it will remain for Napoleon to provide France with a unified national body of law. Under his rule, 5 basic codes were promulgated: the civil code, the penal code, the commercial code, and the codes of civil and criminal procedure. As I said, these 5 codes create the essential subject we now learn in the law school, notwithstanding its legal tradition. It offers the first courses in the United States, and also we learn in this sequence in the earlier years of this law school. The French Civil Code of 1804, drafted in a remarkably short period of time by a commission of 4 eminent jurists, has just claimed to being the first modern code. Although it hewed rather closely to the framework of a Justinian's institutes, it was not, as Justinian's code basically was, a restatement of the law. Its substantive provisions incorporated the results of profound intellectual, political, and social revolution. Though it is often referred to as the Code Napoleon, its original name was the Code Civil de France, the civil code of the French people in English. In what its title represented, as in other ways, it was unlike all earlier efforts at codification. It represented a new way of thinking about man, law, and government. The 3 ideological pillars of the French Civil Code were private property, a freedom contract, and a patriarchal family, which founded the basic principle of a modern legal system. The sanctity of private property and freedom contract plays a role of pillar to sustain the liberal capitalistic framework of society. You see, in the first of these areas, the code made an abrupt break with the feudal past through such private law devices as prohibitions on restraints on alienation and limitations freedom of taxation. The code's architects consciously sought to break up the estates of powerful landed aristocracy. By the very fact of claiming the areas of property, contract, and family for private civil law, the code was performing what may be called a constitutional function. But you need to beware if the kind of absolute principles may vary to the circumstantial a demand. For example, how to connote the patriarchal family. The theme was generally generated in terms of a Western familiar system, or the male or kind of male dominance, or a subjectives of a female to the absolute father. But this scenario gradually changed to receive the rise of a female groups in modern times, and also the sector of property decreased to cure kind of a force, which is a fundamental in some sense, arising from the capitalistic framework of society. By the very fact of claiming the areas of property, contract, and family. So we now see, however, the basics of our intelligence living this contemporary years. In these spheres, the primary role of state was to be to protect private property, to enforce legal form contract, as you see in the contract clause of United States. The government should forbear to intervene in the private relations based on their autonomy and about the contract. This concept was also modified in terms of social goodness and the demand of a social welfare, social justice, and to secure the autonomy of patriarchal family. It also provides a spiritual foundation for the new Napoleonic Code. At the same time that the French Civil Code was introducing new elements into civil law tradition in the field of private law, French revolutionary ideas were contributing in important ways to newly developing field of public law. The French Revolution and subsequent Napoleonic rule have furthered the process of strengthening the central state and eliminating intermediate sources of power and religion. In this context, we can understand the prosperity of a French administrative law, and the administrative acts, decrees, or dispositions were not subject to the constitutional control. They adopt a preliminary type of a judicial review based on the Constitution, but it was before the enactment and upon a selective advice made by a president and French legislature. So it is less powerful as compared to the counterparts, United States or other strong constitutional states we now see in modern times. The French Revolution and subsequent Napoleonic rule have furthered the process of strengthening the central state, as I've said, and in this new political situation, there was little role for Roman or medieval law to play in the fashioning of the rules that henceforth would regulate the relationships of the branches and agencies of a government with each other and with citizens. In the 19th century, modern a public law was emerging from a crucible where those ways of thinking about government associated with the American and French revolutions were enacting with older royal bureaucratic traditions. So now we need to be reminded about the adage, painting through this course of a comparative endeavor, that the law would not could not be created instantly or absolutely from our past traditions or practices. It is a social nature and historical nature to be affected, to be affected backward and forward. So kind of autonomy may found in a legal preserve, which could be well detached from political, economic, or social pressures at given times. To varying degrees in different parts of the world, English and French ideas about equality, democracy, representative government, the separation of powers, and natural rights to life, liberty, and property were influential in forming systems of public law. In spite of all that was new in the French legal revolution, there was still much continuity with the past. First, and most obviously, continuity was provided by the sources drawn upon by Napoleon's draftsman. With a short period of time at their disposal and under much pressure from the first consul, they could not and did not try to create a code out of whole cloth. Naturally, they turned to the Jus Commune, the royal ordinances, the doctrine writing, and custom law, particularly the influential custom of Paris, which had been conveniently written down in the 16th century. Like the draftsmen of other Enlightenment codes, they thought of themselves as putting all these prior laws through a sieve of reason, retaining or rejecting it according to rational principles. But the formal tripartite structure of the end product, a person's property, and the different modes of acquiring property, was virtually identical to that of the first three books of Justinian's Institutes. So far as the substantive rules of law were concerned, the draftsmen relied primarily and in about equal measures on both customary law and a jus commune. A few provisions, such as those on divorce by mutual consent and adoption, are attributable to the influence of Napoleon. So he was the person actually practiced a divorce with the empress, his empress. The great personal interest that Napoleon took in the code was not so much in its substantive content, however, as it was in the fact of its existence. He wanted to be remembered as a great lawgiver. Because of the importance he accorded to the code, he secured its adoption in France and imposed it in his conquered territories, in Italy, Poland, and the Low Countries, and among the ruins of Habsburg Empire. In exile on St. Helena, Napoleon referred to the code as a greater achievement than all his victories. One Waterloo wipes out their memory, but my civil code will live forever, in his words. In a form and style, the French civil code stands in marked contrast to the German civil code, which appeared nearly a century later. The Code Civil de France was meant to be read and understood by the citizen. With its clear, fertile, and intentionally concise provisions, its style resembles that of the United States Constitution more than it does the German Civil Code of 1896. The founding fathers of the French Civil Code, like those of the United States Constitution, recognized that the legislator cannot foresee all possible applications of basic principles. The draftsmen opted for the flexibility of general rules rather than for detailed provisions. So the principle goes to the principle in a similar way and shared both in the United States Constitution and the Napoleonic Code. The words of one of the draftsmen, Butler, who is a very influential figure to guide the codification effort intellectually, is a jurist and provide a great account of technical issues about the codification. I still frequently refer to it in this connection. Let's get on the word briefly. In his statement made by Porters, we have equally avoided the dangerous ambition to regulate and foresee everything. The function of law is to fix in broad outline the general maxims of justice, to establish principles rich in implications, and not to descend into details of the questions that can arise in each subject. And let's now turn to section 10 titled German Legal Science. How do you understand German legal science? For most of Korean students, the first will come into our mind would be a pandectic system. Do you agree? So I chose the picture described as a poster in the words a pandector, which is Latin term. And this system strongly dominates the civil law tradition in terms of a system about areas of law they concern. The German Civil Code appeared at the end, and the French Civil Code at the beginning of the turbulent century of Industrial Revolution. The German Code came out of an intellectual and political background that differed in many ways from the French Enlightenment and Revolution, so that endowed the Code Civil. It is thus not surprising that Germany and France have inspired somewhat different sub-traditions in the civil law world. Unlike France, where political unification had been achieved long before legal unity, Germany had remained a loose confederation of kingdoms, duchies, principalities, and independent city-states until it was unified on Bismarck in 1871. So the kind of half-through politics may have say to see the nature of a national development for the German people. So it comes very late when they far later formed the national government under the leadership of Bismarck in 1871. Indeed, as I've seen, the lack of effective central government and the need for common law to facilitate trade has set the stage for the large scale of reception of the Romanesque Jewish commune in a 5th century Germany. However, as German scholars work with the Jewish commune, a certain renationalization of German law had taken place, especially in the 17th and 18th centuries. Like the Bolognese commentators, these German scholars were occupied with adapting the Romanesque law to their own contemporary conditions. In the course of their work, which came to be known as the Jus Modernus Pandectrum, they increasingly introduced a Germanic legal content into what remained basically a Romanesque structure. This was particularly so in the areas of property and associations. In the 19th century, as the French Civil Code began to be widely admired and imitated the idea of codification aroused interest in Germany. By this time, Germany was already a leading center of legal scholarship on the continent, and the issue of codification became embroiled in a famous scholar dispute. In 1814, a Roman law professor, Civil, advocated a prompt adoption of code as a means of furthering the process of a political unification of Germany. Civil claimed that the Prussian, French, Austrian codes could serve as helpful models. The Prussian and French codes were in fact already in force in parts of Germany. Civil's view was disputed by members of so-called historical school, whose leading spokesman was Friedrich Karl von Savigny. He maintained the law, like language, was a part of the genius and culture of a people. It could not be derived by the methods of reasoning from abstract principles of natural law. Rather, he claimed a nation's law would be revealed by the methods of historical research. He followed the German code should not be adopted without extensive preliminary study of development of German legal institutions. The point of view of Savigny and the historical school prevailed. Under the influence of the ideas, 19th century German legal scholars, by and large, abandoned the historical natural law approach of previous codes in favor of what they saw of as a science of law. They viewed Germanic and classical and received Roman law as data, and regarded themselves as scientists formulating and systematizing concepts and principles from this data. Some put their principal energies into the historical investigation of indigenous law. Others, including Savigny himself, turned to Roman law, not, however, the Jus commune, but to ancient Roman law. They encountered the fact that the Roman jurists had been rather pragmatic individuals. If the Romans at times reflected on the methods and underlying structure of their legal system, they did not leave records of their ideas on these matters. So it came about that in 19th century Germany, legal scholars investigated classical Roman law with the aim of discovering its latent system, which they might adapt to the needs of their own society. In the process, they brought the study of digest to its highest and most systematic level, and thus became known as the Pandectists. Though the Pandectist school grew out of a historical school, in the end it came to adopt a rather historical stance toward law. Believing in the superiority and lasting validity of the institutions of the Romans, the Pandectists tended to exclude a social, ethical, economic, and practical considerations from the legal work. At the time of the recession, there was still no organized and powerful class of practicing lawyers in Germany to moderate this tendency. The methods and concepts developed by the Pandectists came to dominate legal scholarship in Germany just at the time of separation of German civil code began in 1874. So my age forced me to stop here, so I must allow you to have a short break. It will be 10 minutes, and I'll come back soon. See you in the next part of this class.